Good morning. It's wonderful to see all of you here. My name is Deborah Sunya, and I serve as Chief Program Officer at Chautauqua, and it is a delight to welcome all of you to the amphitheater this morning as we conclude week 3 of the 2026 Chautauqua Lecture Series. We do have a few announcements this morning. As you know, Chautauqua is currently under an air quality health advisory. If you need immediate medical attention, please notify one of our ushers or safety and security personnel in the yellow and blue shirts. Masks are currently available at the following locations: library, main gate information desk, visitor center by the post office, bookstore, colonnade lobby, the hotel front desk, Turner Gym, fitness desk, alumni hall, and our octagon by the Hall of Philosophy. Please visit chq.org homepage for any updates here. Today, we are pleased to embrace our neighbors and home county through our 4th annual Chautauqua County Day. What a great opportunity to celebrate our surrounding community and all that it provides us. The day is sponsored by a variety of local foundations, including Chautauqua Regional Community Foundation, Northern Chautauqua Community Foundation, the Winifred Crawford Dibert Foundation, Ralph C. Sheldon Foundation, Jesse Smith Dara Fund, Holquist Foundation, the Lene Foundation, and Wegmans. I can't state more emphatically how grateful we are to our local community partners. I would also add that much of our year-round staff, myself included, call Chautauqua County our home, and we're always so pleased to welcome all of you not only to the institution, but to Chautauqua County. You will have a brief opportunity to greet this morning's speakers, Kosar and Kathryn Dunn Tenpas, on the back porch of the amphitheater following our program. Please note that we must limit the number of people, and we always ask that you keep your greetings to a brief hello. If you'd like to continue the conversation on this or other lectures and program this week, we hope you'll consider participating in Chautauqua Dialogues. They are small group facilitated discussions about the lectures that you will engage this week. Consult the Chautauqua Daily for times and locations. And please note that while dialogues are held at denominational houses, you do not need to be affiliated with the host community or indeed any faith community to attend and participate. All are welcome, and this is an opportunity to listen and learn from each other and engage with each other. As this week draws to a close and some of you prepare to transition to your other home, we hope that you've had a transformative Chautauqua experience, and we invite you to come back and join us again in 2027. If you've enjoyed the programs this week, we will draw your attention to week 1 in 2027, the American Constitution, and week 3, titled simply Trust. Of course, these are just 2 of 9 thought-provoking and action-inspiring topics on deck for next season. More information, plus a list of continually confirmed presenters and artists, is available at 2027.chq.org. In addition to our in-person audience, we are pleased to welcome those of you watching and engaging with this program through our Chautauqua Institution YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us. All of you who are with us live are welcome to participate in the Q&A at the end of our program. You may submit questions at questions.chq.org. And if you are in the amphitheater, you can also use real pen and paper. Raise your hand and our ushers will look for you as the lecture concludes to ask a question in that manner. Friends, at Chautauqua, we take great pride in the environment we create as a community that welcomes a variety of perspectives as we explore the best in human values. We thank all of you in our audience for honoring the spirit of this forum and for your collegial responses to our speakers and staff and to each other. Lastly, out of respect for this morning's speakers and everyone around you, please take this opportunity to turn off anything that might buzz or beep, and we will get ready to enjoy this morning together. This concludes our announcements. This morning, we conclude our week in partnership with the American Enterprise Institute and Brookings Institution on the theme, The 2026 Election, What's at Stake? We're honored to welcome Kevin R. Kosar from AEI and Kathryn Dunn Tenpas from Brookings, two of the nation's leading experts in the workings of the U.S. federal government, governance, and interbranch relations, to share their analysis on the state of the federal government, federalism, and U.S. elections. Kevin Kosar is a senior fellow at AEI, where he studies the U.S. Congress, the administrative state, American politics, election reform, and the U.S. Postal Service. He edits understandingcongress.org and hosts the Understanding Congress podcast. Before joining AEI, Dr. Kosar was at the R Street Institute, where he served as Vice President of Policy, Vice President of Research Partnerships, and Senior Fellow and Director of the Governance Project. He also co-founded the Legislative Branch Capacity Working Group, a transpartisan project to strengthen the legislative branch. Kathryn Dunn Tenpas is a visiting fellow in governance studies and director of the Initiative on Improving Interbranch Relations and Government at Brookings. She also serves as a practitioner senior fellow at the University of Virginia's Miller Center and on the advisory board of the White House Transition Project. Dr. Tenpas's research addresses the intersection between the presidency and politics, focusing on presidential personnel, Senate-confirmed appointments, transitions, re-election campaigns, and trends in presidential travel and polling. Her studies of White House staffing include an original database that tracks turnover rates among senior staffers. It is our honor to host Kevin and Katie and Katie's husband Ron this week on this first visit to Chautauqua for All, made possible in part by the Gwynn Family Fund. A note on the format this morning: Kevin and Katie will engage each other in conversation for about 45 to 50 minutes, and then I will join them in our closing minutes to orchestrate our traditional Q&A, where we invite you into the conversation. Chautauqua, please join me in offering a warm welcome to Dr. Kevin Kosar and Dr. Kathryn Dunn Tenpas.
Thank you so much. I am truly honored to have been invited to speak here today. And as Deborah mentioned, this is my first time here, and I am just enthralled with every aspect of it. So thank you for that kind invitation and the kind introduction as well. Another first is, as a political scientist, I'm really excited to be the opening act for Harry Connick Jr. Kevin?
Yes, okay. It's wonderful to be on stage with you. We've had various partnerships over the years. AEI and Brookings are kind of sibling institutions. We're only a short walk from one another, and the cross-pollination that's happened between our two think tanks, I mean, it dates back decades. So it's always a delight to be up here on stage with you. And there are so many people to thank. But I won't chew up too much time doing that. I certainly want to thank the Gwynn Foundation and the various other supporters of Chautauqua. To invest in education is to invest in the future, and it's to invest in helping us all be better and to better serve as citizens in a republic. And I'm just so delighted that people still care enough to not just to put the money there, but also to show up. Thank you all for being here. It would have been so much easier to watch on YouTube or to simply skip this and stay inside and look at you. You're all here. It's just amazing. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Deborah and Jordan and May of Chautauqua, who have been instrumental in bringing us here. And it's been, this week for me has been tremendous. I got here on Sunday, even though I didn't have to speak until Friday, because I wanted the chance to immerse myself in this place. And it's been astonishing. I won't lie, by Wednesday, I was flipping through the Chautauqua newspaper and looking at the real estate ads and thinking, is there some way I could just come back next year? So many people I've just struck up relationships with. I've bumped into in the bar, or just walking down the street, or talked to them at other events held here. What a community. And so thank you all. It's been absolutely remarkable.
Great. So when Kevin and I were invited to talk about midterm elections, we tried to come up with a program that we thought, we want you to be able to take away knowledge, and we don't just want to talk about potential outcomes of the November elections. We think it's more important to sort of give you a broader perspective of American politics. And so we're going to break our talk into 4 sections today. We're going to start by talking about today's electoral context. The conditions under which our polity is working right now are truly unique, and we want to draw your attention to some of those key features and set the stage. The second part of the talk is my favorite, because I always like to understand kind of the truly unique features, or what I call unconventional wisdom. What are some things about midterm elections that you didn't know before you walked into this beautiful stage setting? Then we'll follow that with what we consider to be reasonable outcomes, possible outcomes in November. Kevin will take over with that. And then finally, I think this is actually the most important part, because I care a lot about governance, governing, how our institutions work. So we want to talk about, under these possible political outcomes, what does it mean for governing? So after the election in January, when all of those people are sworn in to these new positions, that's when the rubber meets the road of these elections. And so what is the likely impact that these outcomes might have on the future of American government? So I think we're going to kick it off first with Kevin starting to talk about the electoral context.
All right, time to put on the goggles, because I have reached that age that even though I did my printout in 18-point font, I still can't see it. All right, yes, the electoral context. It's a peculiar one. I'll say that up top. And I'll also say the peculiarity of the current political context also makes it a little tricky to try to compare past political trends and extend them into this future and say this is probably what will happen. So a little of a caveat there. When we're talking about the electoral context and the peculiarity of it, there are 3 things that really stick out to me as being different, especially since they're all occurring at the same time. The first of which is we're in a period of exceedingly high partisan polarization. We're also in a period of exceedingly narrow margins, partisan margins, in the Senate and the House. The days when Democrats or even Republicans could have 50 or 60 seat majorities, that's not where we're at. Third salient feature of our current political context is it's a period of extreme gerrymandering. Each of the 2 parties, so desperate to eke out a win, are doing everything they can to tilt House elections their own way. And as you all know, we are in the 21st century, and so no longer are these folks sitting around reading paper ledgers of votes by county and neighborhood. This is a big data computational, even AI type exercise. And so this battle is getting more intense, and the odds are going higher and higher. So, I would hope that the various political trends that we've identified as occurring in past midterms will hold carrying into this one, but I am prepared to be shocked. This year's midterm may not be the same as the midterms were back when, say, George W. Bush were in House. We may see something surprising occur. Now, just to take a look at Congress, at the moment we have 53 seats held by Republicans. We have 45 seats held by Democrats, and we have 2 seats held by independents who caucus with the Democrats. 53-47 margin. Over in the House, and that's when everybody's able to show up. We'll see when Mr. McConnell comes back. Over in the House, about 218 Republicans, 213 Democrats, 1 nominal independent, Kevin Kiley of California. Earlier this year, he's a Republican, but he sensed that being in a swing district, the Republican brand was maybe not to his advantage, and so he resigned from the Republican Party and became an independent. We also have 4 vacancies in the House. You look at both these chambers, and the big takeaway is that it doesn't take many wins for the Democrats to alter the majority status. I mentioned history and historical trends. The party of the president almost inevitably loses seats in the House and has done so in 20 of the past 22 midterm elections. And that goes back to about 1938, my goodness. The unusual exceptions were 1998, Bill Clinton's second term. Arguably, the reason we were surprised that year is because the Republicans wildly overplayed their hand in trying to impeach Mr. Clinton, and then they had their own scandals erupt. Newt Gingrich imploded. A lot of high salience bad things that weren't good for the Republican brand. The other instance of a president not losing a bunch of House seats in the midterms was 2002. And as we all remember, that was not long after 9/11, and there was a rally around the flag sort of effect that happened where Democrats and Republicans and voters generally coalesced and were in a more collectively cheerful, or not cheerful, but we were together. We were not so at odds with one another. Katie, what did I miss?
Yeah. The other point I would add is that this year there's been a record number of retirements from Congress. Nearly 15% of the members, or 78, have retired, and that also raises questions. It creates open seats and creates the opportunity for, unclear, sort of unpredictable outcomes. Another feature that sort of follows true with what he said, with what Kevin has said about polarization, is if you think about the Senate, right? The Senate is not affected by gerrymandering. Every state gets 2 senators. But the number of states with split delegations, meaning a Republican and a Democrat serving for that state, has dropped from 27 to 4 since 1980, which sort of draws attention to this notion of geographical sorting, political polarization. This is somewhat tangential, but what I'm really interested in that respect is how it affects judicial selection in the future, right? Because split delegations are tended to be more compromised on who the judicial candidates would be. But when it is more 2 Republicans from each state, 2 Democrats from each state, it sort of changes the conditions. But I think that's another feature to remember as we go forward talking about the midterm elections. And I think I'll switch gears now to sort of draw your attention to unconventional wisdom about midterm elections. The first feature is the lack of competition. In the House of Representatives, there are 435 elections. Of the 435 seats up for re-election in the House, roughly 38 are called competitive races. And hopefully you, like me, are wrapped up in the World Cup where you watch all of these soccer matches, and the outcome is so unclear and it's so competitive and these teams are fighting so hard. But in this country, at the midterm election time, there really are not that many races due to gerrymandering and a host of other factors that are truly competitive races. I think that's somewhat surprising, and that number also has decreased over time. Another unusual feature of our midterm elections is the unrepresentative nature of those individuals who participate in the primaries that lead up to the midterm elections in November. Generally speaking, you tend to get voters that are hardcore conservatives or hardcore liberals voting in those primaries. So what that means, especially when it's an open seat, is that you're going to get a more conservative or a more liberal candidate who's going to be on that general election ballot. As a result, that just sort of makes our politics even more polarized than it would otherwise be. Another feature of our elections that I think, to an outsider might be surprising is the low level of turnout compared to presidential election years. Roughly 40 to 50% of eligible voters cast ballots in midterm elections. And if you think about the consequences of these midterm elections, changing the composition in the majorities in the House and the Senate, and what that means for policymaking, it's astonishing that in a democracy like ours, less than 50% of the individuals actually participate. Presidential election years, the rate bumps up, it's higher, it's roughly 55 to 66% participate in presidential election voting. But if you take our democracy and compare it to other democracies across the world that are similarly situated economically and otherwise, our participation rates are quite low, quite low. And then finally, one sort of feature of these midterm elections that I think everyone needs to be wary of is the polling. There is such a focus on polling. It's an easy story to write about, but polling is weak. We've known this since the dawn of polling with the 1948 erroneous Truman-Dewey prediction. And despite technological advancements, polling still suffers from methodological weaknesses. If you think about congressional races, these pollsters are trying to poll individual congressional districts. They're not that large. The response rate, when they're calling up thousands of people to get them to find out what their opinions are and what their voter preferences are, less than 1% of those people answer the phone and talks to these pollsters. That raises questions about the validity of the sample. Is it truly representative of this particular congressional district? Or if it's a Senate poll, is it truly representative of that particular state? So I would sort of say that we need to be going forward to this election, we need to be wary of the polls and don't read too much into them. We're going to get to the heart of things right now with Kevin talking about possible outcomes. So we've set the stage. You understand what a unique period this is in American politics. You understand some of the more quirky features of our political system. And now Kevin is going to get to the heart of what some possible outcomes could be in November.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. I just want to pause. Earlier I mentioned a salient feature of our time is this really intense partisan polarization. And one of the facts that you shared with me, Katie, was that at last tabulation, and mind you, this could change tomorrow or next week, 78 of 535 current members of Congress have already quit. They're not coming back. That's 14.6%, the highest since 1992, I think you tabulated. And
I can add a fun fact there. 1992, how many of you remember the check kiting scandal, the congressional baking scandal that angered so many voters that there was a high level of anti-incumbency that year. And that's the most retirements we've had since then.
Yeah, and as somebody who spent the last 23 years now in Washington, D.C., working directly with Congress and congressional staffers, I can tell you that in this instance, I think a lot of the retirements and the departures are driven in part by despair. Capitol Hill is not a fun place to work anymore due to the fact that the polarization is so intense and there is so frequently a lack of goodwill in dealing across the aisle with one another. All right. Yes, let us beware of the polls, but let us speak of the polls and think a little bit about the possible outcomes this autumn. My top line is probably not going to be surprising to all of you. You are all very tuned in, but I'll give it to you nonetheless. I think Democrats are quite likely to win control of the House, and that Republicans are probably going to retain a majority in the Senate. Now, would I bet my retirement fund on it? No. Look, turnout is everything. If we get only 40% of people show up, that's a different sample of the population. If we should get a flush of 60 or 70%, that's gonna change things. So turnout. Let us hope for lots of turnout so that the desires of the public are better expressed in the results. All right, I am going to hit you with a slide. let's take a look at the Senate as it currently stands. And it's rather funny. Yesterday, Katie and I were talking about our presentation, and we were going over and double-checking our facts. And I had a slide ready. I had some data points ready. And when we checked, the data had changed within 48 hours. So I had to update. Kind of my favorite site to turn to when I want to take a look at the state of the polls is the Cook Political Report. They are just an even, honest broker. They aggregate gobs and gobs of data. They just have a terrific reputation. And so this comes from their site. And as you can see, there are 35 seats up for grabs in 2026. Those of you who are really astute about the Senate know that there's typically only 33 seats up, and we do that every 2 years. But in this case, we had 2 vacant seats, Mr. Rubio, Mr. Vance, that triggered special elections. So GOP controls it. What would it take for Democrats to win? The math is pretty straightforward. They hold 34 seats that are not up for elections, so those are in the bag. In order to take the chamber by a nominal majority, they have to win all 9 of the solidly Democratic races. The 4 other races where they appear presently to have an advantage, and mind you, that can shift. The 2 toss-up elections in Maine and Alaska. Maine's going to be especially tough because they no longer have a candidate, last I checked. And they would need to pick up 2 of the states that are presently leaning Republican. Again, that's a tall order. Is it possible? Yes. Is it probable? No. It doesn't look so at the moment. But at the moment is the key word there. Now let's take a quick peek at the House. That's not the House. That's the House. This is another wonderful map by the good people at Cook Political Report. Here, 435 members of the House. To win the chamber, Democrats need 218. Right now, they have 205 races going their way. That's got to be pretty exciting for them. That leaves them with 13 seats to pick up out of the remaining 19 toss-up races and the 9 races that lean a little towards Republicans. This is not going to be a cakewalk for Democrats. But just about every poll is predicting Democrats will eke out a majority. And it's not just the polls that are predicting Democrats will take the House and Republicans will hold the Senate. A lot of close observers of elections also think that's the result we're going to get. GOP holds Senate, Democrats take the House. All of you who've read the New York Times, no doubt saw earlier this week, there were 6 pollsters, journalists, and scholars. They were queried, same thing. They all thought House goes to Democrats, GOP holds Republicans. The only difference between them is, the margins, which in every case was small. Nobody is imagining a 40-seat blowout for Democrats or Republicans. Interestingly, you get the same results when you talk to the people on Capitol Hill. The Punchbowl News recently surveyed senior congressional staffers, and get this, they found that 87% of congressional staffers believed Democrats would take the House. 77% thought the GOP would hold the Senate. And remarkably, 82% of Republican staffers agreed with the statement, quote, Democrats are in a better position entering the campaign season, end quote. So I should add here that if you're a betting person, as of yesterday, Kalshi puts the odds of a Democratic victory in the House at over 80%. Rather surprising, but that's where people are putting their money. And a GOP Senate victory, they're putting it at 54%. So all this sounds promising for Democrats. But keep in mind the GOP, when it comes to the House, does come in with an advantage. Republicans have 180 House seats that are all but certain to go Republican. As Katie talked about earlier, due to various features of modern society, some seats are just not competitive ever. Democrats, meanwhile, have 178, so that puts them at a 2-seat deficit kind of going into this scrum. But the polls, as we've indicated, are just the polls, and things can change, right, Katie?
Yeah. So I'm going to completely muddy the waters because I'm going to talk about all the other factors that could sort of alter the predictions that Kevin just made. Or they could reinforce them, right? The first is Trump's poll ratings. So the president is not up for election, obviously, but his poll ratings matter a great deal. My colleague at Brookings, Bill Galston, wrote that, as we have seen, there is no modern president for the president's party to avoid losses in the House unless the president's job approval is well above 50%. President Trump's job approval in a recent Washington Post poll is 37%. And just to provide some comparison, in 2018, the Republicans lost, when Trump was in office the first term, in 2018, Republicans lost 40 seats in the House when Trump's approval rating was 40%. The other point I'd want to make is something called the reverse coattail effect that happens in midterm elections. And so the coattail effect is this idea that in presidential elections, if you have a very popular presidential candidate, let's say Barack Obama in 2008, that individuals vote and they'll just vote for that same party completely down the ballot. And so the idea is that the president's coattails bring in this huge coterie of fellow office holders, and it helps him in Congress. It helps in the first 2 years to get a lot of their legislative agenda off the ground. Well, the opposite is true. In midterms, we have what's called the reverse coattail effect. In this case, Republican voters are probably less motivated, and some might be disillusioned by what they have seen within the first 2 years of the administration and less likely to vote for Republicans. Another related point is voter fatigue. MAGA supporters and others likely have less energy this election. They're less motivated than the opposition party. And data show that independents who voted for Trump in 2024 are definitely feeling the Trump fatigue. So that could slant the scales and push them in the direction of the Democrats a little bit more. Another key point that I'm sure everybody in this room is familiar with is the state of the economy and consumer sentiment. Pocketbook issues are real. And voters who feel bad about the economy often vote against the president's party. I'm citing polls right now, and I was the one who told you to be wary of polls, but currently 61% of voters disapprove of Trump's handling of the economy. Inflation continues to aggrieve voters, and Mr. Trump's rhetoric in this regard, his unwillingness to recognize the affordability crisis, does not help. Consider tariffs, the ongoing war with Iran, gas and diesel prices jumping. Meanwhile, on the other side of the ledger, in Washington, D.C., where we live, you have the remodeling and the building of a ballroom at the White House. You have the, I'm not sure what you would call it, of the reflecting pool. And importantly, we have the renovation of D.C. golf courses, which will likely affect a small number of voters this November. And so there seems to be this dichotomy in perceptions of the economy that I think could really influence voters this November. Also, I'm going to borrow a phrase from the George W. Bush administration, the Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, who liked to talk about known knowns and known unknowns. So I'm going to share some known knowns that I think also will impact the outcome of the election. First is President Trump's efforts to curb mail-in voting. Not sure how that's going to impact results. A lot of Republicans want to mail in their ballots. The president himself mailed in his ballot. The speech last night that raised a lot of questions about the integrity of our electoral process and our electoral systems in all 50 states, that could dampen turnout amongst the president's supporters because they're uncertain and don't feel as though the election process is safe. The ongoing Iran conflict, that could clearly alienate his own voters that voted for him in 2024. What about Latino Republicans and Trump supporters in competitive districts? Will they turn out after the various ICE shootings and the various investigations. Those are my known knowns, and those could have a huge impact. We just don't know. The known unknowns, what if China invades Taiwan? What if there's another pandemic? What if Putin dies and average Russians take to the street demanding democracy? Again, we don't know how these developments will affect voters, so all to say that we can do well trying to predict outcomes. Charlie Cook's The Cook Political Report is very sound methodologically and does its best to predict them, but there are a lot of known knowns, known unknowns, and other factors that I think are going to complicate the outcome in November. Don't spend your retirement funds.
Oh no, I'm not a betting man. I don't have enough to lose.
So we're going to now bring you into sort of the final phase of our analysis, which is thinking about what governing will look like under the two potential outcomes, with Democrats having control of the House, Republicans having control of the Senate, or the possibility, the distinct possibility, probably low likelihood, but if Republicans maintain control of the House and the Senate.
Yes.
What's going to happen?
Those are two different scenarios. I'll talk a little bit about each, but let me give you the top line, which is that under either of these scenarios, the narrow margins in the chamber of the Senate and the House are going to continue to make it difficult for Congress to move legislation. It's just going to keep being a grind. The days when you could have 60 plus senators of one party and 270 House members of one party, and they could just rush legislation through and put it in the president's desk, and if he didn't like it, they could then override the veto. We're just not there. Vigorous legislative governance is not going to happen in either of these two scenarios. But these scenarios will be different. Scenario one, where the Dems take the House and the GOP holds the Senate, what does it mean for governance? Well, certainly Trump is going to be, like other presidents, a bit of a lame duck. He's not running for re-election, and that's not going to happen. Losing control of the House is going to exacerbate his weakness, just as it did in 2018 when his party lost the House. It's going to make it harder for them to move policy on a party line vote because they're just not going to have control of the chamber. One thing that goes away from Mr. Trump and the Republican Party is the ability to use the budget reconciliation process. This is a process that by law is supposed to be used as part of the annual budgeting exercise, and one of its key features is that it can't be filibustered in the Senate. It's become a very attractive tool for both parties to just ram through things on a party line vote, because as long as you can muster 51 in the Senate, you're good to go. Well, reconciliation, which was used in the last couple of years to do things like the Big Beautiful Bill Act, that just won't be available under this scenario. I would not be surprised with the legislature even more gummed up and less welcoming to Mr. Trump's ideas, that if the response from the White House is more unilateral executive branch actions. Look, the Democrats are campaigning in a large part of their message now is that send us to Washington so we can fight that guy in the White House. When you campaign like that, that makes it even less likely that you're going to want to move policy with that guy. It's not a good look. And I think Democrats are going to be exceedingly incentivized to fight. I presume that once they have control of gavels in the House, that the various committees are going to be doing lots of investigations of the Trump administration. Unfortunately, one of the one of the unfortunate probable aspects of this scenario is that we may see more government shutdowns. Think about it. If you're the Democrats, your real leverage in lawmaking is going to be over what money gets spent and how it gets spent. And Democrats in the House are going to feel really juiced up that when appropriations bills are being drafted, and there are 12 of them to fund the whole federal government, they're going to feel really incentivized to use that authority to push back on the president and to get in place policies that they want. So things that DOJ may have deleted, they're going to want to fix that. How ICE can be using funding, they're going to want to limit the uses. They're going to want to do a whole bunch of things. And the open question is, when they pass those bills, how's the Senate going to respond? How much of that is the GOP Senate going to be willing to eat? And then if they do eat it, what happens when they pass that along to Mr. Trump? Otherwise, a few salient features of this first scenario is that it's my presumption that Mr. Jeffries will be the Speaker of the House again. But because the margins are likely to be narrow, he's going to have to cut a lot of deals with the factions within his own party in order to get the votes. I trust that the Democrats collectively do not want to repeat the scenario that Kevin McCarthy went through. They do not want to burn January and chunks of February holding a fight for the speakership. Yet nonetheless, there are distinct factions within the Democratic Party inside the House, progressives, possibly some Democratic socialists, who are going to make real demands, whether it's a seat at the policymaking table, stronger positions within the Democratic caucus, particular chairmanships, legislation that they want votes on right up front. I assume they're going to be making demands, and I wouldn't be surprised if Mr. Jeffries, who is a very canny politician, is not already working these things out with them, because he certainly wants things to go smoothly in January. No drama. And yes, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention in this scenario the possibility that the House will once again attempt to impeach Mr. Trump. It's going to be a tough call because, again, every minute you spend impeaching is a minute you spend not doing something else. And as we know, if the GOP holds the Senate, the odds of getting that high threshold that the Senate would actually make good on the impeachment, the odds are very low. Okay, let me get to the second most likely outcome. GOP unified government continues. Mike Johnson and company have a miracle and keep control of the chamber. How do they respond to that? Well, again, they know Mr. Trump has 2 years left, and absent a sudden spike in his approval ratings, he's a bit weaker. But nonetheless, I think in the short term, they're going to feel highly incentivized to do what they did at the start of his presidency, which is to partner tightly with him and, again, try to push things through Congress along party line votes, multiple uses of the reconciliation process that readily lends itself to doing that sort of things. And I did say, Mike Johnson, I would guess that he would continue on in that position. Thomas Massie is gone, Marjorie Taylor Greene is gone, some of the other thorns in his side are gone, but more thorns may be coming. And again, the margins are narrow, so any member of the House who's in the GOP can basically play kingmaker and just cross their arms and say, no, you don't have my vote. Poor Mike Johnson. I would not want his job. I would not want to be the Speaker. In the Senate, I think pressure will continue on the Republicans from within the party to create additional carve-outs of the filibuster. Again, if you don't have big margins in the chamber, you try to look for ways that you can eke through legislation with 51 votes. And whether the GOP will capitulate to that remains to be seen. Maybe the filibuster continues on. I would, if I had to place chips, I would place chips on that, but we'll see. Interesting thing on the other side of the aisle, Democratic senators, will they depose Mr. Schumer? Maybe. The talk is in the air How the election plays out and perceptions of his success are part of it, but there's also a great demand for generational change that's hitting Congress generally. And Mr. Schumer is no spring chicken. Amongst Republicans, I would guess Mr. Thune holds the position. I haven't seen anybody else actively jockeying to get the job, and I'm not sure why anyone would want the job. So let me conclude with that scenario, neither of which, again, speak to a situation where we have sweeping legislative governance for the next 2 years. Katie.
Yeah, and I think we'd be remiss without talking about the elephant in the room, which was the speech last night, raising questions about the integrity of U.S. elections. I also have sort of a side set of studies on the notion of democratic erosion and what this administration has done. I'm largely focused on personnel, all the firings and the stripping away of protections for bureaucrats. Kevin was giving a lot of scenarios about legislatively what can happen in the last 2 years of the Trump administration, but part of me says that doesn't matter. He doesn't work through the legislation. He is not a typical president that abides by norms, that abides by tradition, that abides by the Constitution. And so he will find extra constitutional efforts or ways of achieving the remaining policy goals he has, I think, in those last 2 years. I believe in Congress. It's, Article 1 of the Constitution lays out all of its powers, and it plays an important role. But I think Congress has sort of been asleep at the switch these days, to some extent. And just some final thoughts. I think separate from the midterm election, as an individual entity and event, we need to think about the broader constitutional landscape that we're working under. What about the separation of powers? What about the systems of checks and balances? How do we move forward in successive administrations to try to restore a healthy, vibrant Congress that has oversight, that checks the executive's powers? A court that isn't constantly being criticized publicly, a court that checks the powers of a president. And I think we need... in summary, this is a high-stakes election. There is no doubt about it. But I do think it's unlikely to result in a sea change governance-wise. It's going to be a lot more of the same, I think. There will not be a blue wave. Likely we'll have divided government that, as Kevin said, will complicate any legislative productivity. We're going to continue to encourage this inter-party conflict, which really isn't good for our polity either. And we're going to have continued unilateral exercise of presidential powers, no doubt about that. I hate to sort of end on a glum note. I think there is hope in the future. I think a lot of the courts are starting to issue decisions, and judges are starting to issue decisions that curb the president's power. We've talked a lot about the lame duck status of a president, and it could be, depending on the outcome of the elections, that Trump is more of a bystander than he has been these first 2 years. But we shall see. Do you have anything else to add, Kevin?
No. I think that is the central question is how do we get this republic to work as it should? We've fallen into this situation where there's this quasi-parliamentary behavior in Washington where it's, if it's the Republicans and they have control of the chamber and the White House is controlled by a Democrat, it's let's oppose. If it's, Democrats in charge of the chamber and their presidents in the White House, well then, rah-rah, let's support. It's not really how our system was built, and the fragmentation of the constitutional system does lead to a lot of complications and frustrations, but that breaking up of governing power has actually been a real blessing, because when folks want to abuse it, yes, they can, but the magnitude of the abuse is curbed in many instances. So we can be thankful for that.
Yeah. So we would like to know what's on your mind. What questions do you have, and how can we answer them?
Kevin and Katie, thank you so much. Friends, as you've heard, we are now inviting you into the conversation. A reminder on how to participate. Those of you that have an internet-connected device can reach us on questions.chq.org. I see that you are reaching us. You may also use paper and pencil. Please raise your hand high and our ushers will be looking for you. So let's jump right into conversation. For both of you, I'm going to take several of the questions that are in direct relation to the president's speech last night. So the first one is, do you think the president's speech last night changed the midterm elections in any particular way? Can you comment on that?
I would say no. I think that, number one, not that many people probably watched. I don't know what the Nielsen ratings are, but several of the networks didn't even air the speech. I think it takes a crowd of sort of highly engaged individuals who listen to every word he has to say. And as I mentioned before, economic factors matter, pocketbook issues matter, and most people aren't as engaged with president's speeches. There's also a whole school of political science research, and one of my colleagues wrote a book called On Deaf Ears. And On Deaf Ears is about how presidential speeches don't make a difference in terms of subsequent public approval or subsequent decision making. And so I would just say, generally speaking, speeches don't move the needle very much for any president, let alone one where there was probably relatively limited viewership.
Thank you. Kevin, do you care to comment?
No, I think Katie nailed it. All I would want to do is to say hi to Ruby out there, who I met, and hi to Jess out there. Both of them are welcoming Chautauquans who made me feel so good to be here. Thank you. Hi, guys.
Fantastic. So, Katie, you mentioned that some of the broadcast networks did not provide live coverage, and someone asked exactly that. They say 2 TV broadcast networks did not provide live coverage, and CBS only did so through their app. Can you speak to media's influence on the upcoming elections? I should mention we have had a week on media, but they would like to hear from both of you on media's influence on the upcoming elections.
Okay, well, let me just start with the antecedent, which is that a lot of these networks did not air it. Part of that is because they believed that there was not evidence to say that these elections were tampered with by the Chinese or whomever. And I think it's important that our media be able to hold true to their principles and be allowed to make the choice not to broadcast something where they don't believe that there is sufficient evidence to make the case. And so, having said that, does the media influence elections? Absolutely. But I also think that over the past 3 decades or so, we no longer have, growing up, we watched either ABC News, NBC News, CBS, or maybe PBS. And now there are all of these outlets, and the algorithms make it so that it's constantly reinforcing your political views. And so you really just have one channel and one outlet, and that could be skewed. And so media will influence, but in a different way than maybe it did in the 80s and the 90s and early 2000s.
Yeah, all I can say is that, the media landscape is a whole different beast at this point in time, and I'll be very curious to see how much the White House communications team and the various allies they've created out there, the internet influencers and social media folks, how much they are able to amplify these claims. And, they put all those files out there last night. Is there an October surprise in there, so to speak? Is there something really, truly damning? We're going to find out in the coming weeks. And if there's no there, well, good luck getting a bump in voter turnout. Because, again, turnout is going to matter. If you can rally the base, as you said, the Republicans who may be like, we don't want to turn out for the midterms, if you can get them to go forward through this announcement, maybe that has an effect, but not so sure.
So moving on from potential media influence on the election, we have several questions about other influences on the election. The first is, to what extent do you think Israel will be a factor in the upcoming election, and in what manner and why? What manner and why?
That's a good question. I would say that the Republican Party is certainly feeling strong incentives to play up the divisiveness within the Democratic Party over the Middle East, Israel, Palestine, etc. Certainly, every DSA member or other Democrat progressive who takes a kind of strong stand about what's happening over there, those will be media clipped and those will be used very, very heavily. Again, I honestly don't know what effect that will have on the average American voter who's not, not excessively engaged on this. Will it move them one way or another? I can't say.
Thank you. The next question is, how much will the possible corruption of the president and his family influence the midterms? How many people believe there is corruption?
Well, I think if you look at polls generally, what you find is that President Trump has sort of a solid, like 30 to 33% support of voters or people who approve of the job he's doing. Job approval is 37%. Who are the 37%? How engaged are they? And so I think that there are still a group of loyalists. This is a tangent, but I study White House staffing, and what's clearly different in this second term is that he's surrounded himself with loyalists. There's nobody objecting to anything that he's doing. They're all saying, yes, go. And I think that that sort of encourages more of this behavior that is corrupt by many standards. But I think it's going to take a while to get a Congress that is sort of bold enough to challenge him on these things and to start some investigations. I'm not sure it will affect, again, getting back to what we've said before, most voters are not as deeply engaged, and they might read a headline about corruption in the presidency, but I think they're more attuned to, like, how is their business doing? How are their children doing? Are they healthy? Do they have access to healthcare? And other affordability issues that I think will overshadow that.
We just briefly add corruption. The data show that generally American voters are very apt to believe that politicians are corrupt. So if the Democrats are able to make plausible case that the White House is rife with corruption, yeah, it could be a potent issue for them.
I'm representing several questions here where a few people are saying, can we assume that this will be a free and fair election? One online listener says, while you touched on this, can you speak to if the president will put a finger on the scale for a free and fair election? What do you believe?
I think it's unclear. And personally, I'm a little bit nervous about reviewing ballots that have been cast in the aftermath. What's been happening in Georgia is very concerning. I like to be an optimist and I like to think positively, but the speech last night to me was one of the most concerning speeches I've ever heard from a chief executive. The engagement of the FBI, the DOJ, the relationship between the White House and DOJ, there used to be a firewall in other administrations between DOJ and the White House. The idea was that the president would not interfere with any investigations or anything with the Department of Justice, and we've seen that wall come down. The director of the FBI doesn't instill a lot of confidence in a lot of people, and frankly, I'm nervous. Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the perks of the office are going to be used, as they always are used, to advertise the president. There will also be presidential versions of pork barrel spending that will go on. Let's start steering grants to here. Let's claim credit for that. Mr. Trump's more than happy to spend other people's money in the hopes of, bolstering his own support. But will something nefarious occur to discourage people from voting? I think already the kind of rumors in the air about, we have to stop non-citizens from voting. Could there be agents, placed at the polls? Are we going to, reach into local electoral authorities' offices and demand data from them? Are we going to use the Postal Service to just clamp down on voting by mail? I think those are known unknowns right now. I think a lot of this stuff probably does get tied up in the courts, but everything remains to be seen.
Yeah, and just one more point to add, which is that I think that last night's speech was almost sort of a predicate for him to then to be able to say on the day after the election that the Chinese were involved, or there was corruption, or there was fraud, and so we're going to revoke these results. I actually think that was kind of like laying the groundwork for.
What happens if we have an October shutdown end of the fiscal year and are still shut down during the election, or other claims of election issues, et cetera, that might allow for interference with the election process?
Well, I'll just take the government shutdown part. I actually participated in a study where we interviewed roughly 20 to 30 members of the executive branch to ask them how government shutdowns affected the operations within their agency or their department. And the answers are profound. Everything leading up to a government shutdown, besides the huge amount of money, the uncertainty for all the personnel, in order to shut the government down, they have to go through a whole series of exercises to shut it down. And then when it gets turned back on, when Congress decides we're going to agree and we're going to pass this and we're going to provide money for the government, they have to go back to all of those steps, those tedious steps, to restart the government. It is a tremendous waste of time, resources, talent. And honestly, I think given sort of what's happened with DOGE and the state of our executive branch and bureaucracy more broadly, it's the last thing our government needs. And so as to what it will then do on the election, I'm not sure, but I just think more concretely about what it means about government performance and what it means to people who are receiving Social Security checks or any kind of government assistance. How will they be able to get it when there are these long-term, wasteful government shutdowns?
Yeah, thankfully the Postal Service is financially self-supporting, so voting by mail is not going to get disrupted. Yeah, they have enough cash. They're going to stay above water. We don't have to worry about them shutting down operations in November when ballots and electoral materials are being delivered. So all good on that count. You know, we don't have national elections. We have federal elections that are administered by states and localities. And those are funded by states and localities primarily. So even if the federal government, shuts down, Congress leaves on September 30th with no budget deal, and it drags on for 2+ months, the elections will still be administered.
We are going to move on to questions about what happens after the elections. But before that, I have a little late-breaking Chautauqua news. Wanted to let everyone know that the Shabbat service tonight will be at the Hall of Christ. So that is moving from the Miller Bell Tower to the Hall of Christ. And before you panic, the note says, we will still have the pizza dinner. All right, so moving on to some what-if questions. What if both the Senate and the House flip in November? What implications are there for governance?
Well, that's a quiz question. I should ask you if you listen to us. No, okay. So, again, if it's divided government, it means there's going to be more inter-party conflict. It means there's going to be less productivity. It'll put the brakes on some of the Trump preferences and the Trump administration desires. If it's a Democratic majority in the House and the Senate, that's going to be a huge that will be a sea change, but we're not really predicting that. But I think that I think that there will be much more limitations and investigations on the Trump administration, efforts to sort of refund some of the programs that the Trump administration decided not to fund. There'll be a lot of sort of patching up what happened during the first 2 years, I would imagine.
Oh yeah, there'll be both substantive legislation that's Democrats would send on to the president, but there'd also be symbolic legislation that would be sent on where they will dare him to veto it and to further kind of paint his party as extreme. It would have to be a huge blue wave for the Senate to have enough Democrats to impeach the president, and I don't see enough Republicans who would presently want to defect. As Katie mentioned earlier, the primaries. If you're a Republican and you got to run through those primaries, those primary voters, a lot of them are Trumpist, and you are playing with electoral fire when you do that. We've seen so many GOP folks who stood up to Mr. Trump and then were wrecked in the primaries. So I don't see that happening. I do see also, look, this is the last 2 years of his presidency come January, and he wants to build a legacy. He wants to go out on a high note. He wants to do all sorts of stuff so that he can be in the storybooks as the 21st century George Washington or Abe Lincoln or something like that. He says this stuff out loud. But if you have a complete Democratic Congress, good luck with that.
So someone going another layer deeper about the Senate. If Republicans maintain control of the Senate, how will that affect the Supreme Court? Will Thomas and Alito resign to further push the court to the right?
Well, you know, there was that story that came out that Alito was resigning by NPR that got everybody aflutter. You know, you just need 51 votes, right? So if the Republicans maintain the majorities in the Senate, you know, every now and then people like the senator from Alaska, the senator from Maine, they sort of talk about, oh, we're not so sure about this nominee that the president has nominated for the Supreme Court. But then it seems they always cave, and I'm not sure what happens behind the scenes. But I would expect that if either of those two resign, that Trump will find similarly situated individuals politically who are younger and will be there a lot longer. And if the Senate remains Republican, I think they probably will get confirmed. Yeah.
So let's zoom out a little bit past this election. We have a few questions coming in about ranked choice voting. One listener says, what is the current state of ranked choice voting and how could it impact the election? And another person says, is there a realistic chance for ranked choice voting to be more available? And could that move candidates to the center?
Yeah, so ranked choice voting is one of these preferential systems, electoral reforms that I've been keeping an eye on. I actually wrote a paper not terribly long ago about this kind of movement where there's a lot of energy directed towards things like nonpartisan redistricting, ranked choice voting, approval voting, which is another variant of that, Final Four voting, which we piloted in Alaska. These changes have not been widely adopted for congressional elections so far. And unfortunately, the discussion around elections has gotten so toxic in the last 10 years that having an honest conversation about how we should structure the voting process so that maybe we have fewer elected officials who are picked by a tiny plurality of voters, those conversations cannot be had in a healthy way. Ranked choice voting has actually become vilified by some folks on the right. There's dark money groups that have been set up to counter it. It's just really an unfortunate state of affairs. I'm hoping that electoral experimentation of all sorts, whether it's open primaries, ranked choice voting, pick your flavor, more experiments happen with that at the local level. Out in Portland, they decided to do proportional representation for the city council. Okay, cool. 50 states, many cities, let them be laboratories of democracy. Let's see what happens with these things. And then maybe over time, what gets done locally, those things sort of trickle up. We've seen that in other policy areas, education policy, famously, the Clinton administration back in the 90s. I mean, so much of their education playbook was drawn from governors. Same sort of thing could happen with electoral reform, but trying to get something done at the federal level through passing a law to change the way we vote, probably not going to happen at this point in time.
What can we do to address the non-competitiveness in so many congressional districts?
Yeah, I think that's a tough one because if you're an incumbent, it means you've had the job for 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, and you're able to say, oh, that bridge that you really like that's in the congressional district, yeah, that's because I advocated for that and I brought that home to you. And they're able to really show proof of their effectiveness that they always have a leg up. In addition to that, they tend to be much better at fundraising. In fact, there is data showing that once members of Congress are elected, they start raising money again for that next election. So they have such a head start over their opponents that the power of incumbency is so strong that it makes it more and more difficult for challengers to overcome and actually win. So, I guess there's a rational point incumbents should get reelected. I guess the other problem, though, is that gerrymandering in the House and creating districts that are prone to prone to facilitating the victory of a Republican or of a Democrat is just bad for democracy. I don't know how you reverse the gerrymandering process or the redistricting process that happens across the country, but you know, there are a whole list of things we really need to be thinking about and doing about that have to do with sort of the infrastructure of our democracy. But there's too many fires to put out right now that we can't really care about sort of the fundamental foundation of our house, I think.
Yeah, I would just say that you know, where districts have been slanted one way or another very heavily, the people who are winning don't want change, obviously. And so getting electoral reform through has often been an effort in kind of hacking the system, and that's where state referendum systems, where the people, you put enough signatures on a ballot saying we're going to have a vote about using open primaries or moving to Final Four or doing something else, that's been the way that a lot of this stuff has occurred. And I imagine that process is going to have to be used a lot more.
We'll end with two questions about hope over hopelessness, and the first is this. What can be done to raise the percentage of Americans voting?
I think education is a big part. Thank you, Chautauqua. Education is really important. Civics education, of course. Somehow lowering the thermostat several notches and making politics less heated. But again, I don't see how you do that quickly. Can you state the question one more time?
What can be done to raise the percentage of Americans voting?
Okay. So in other countries like Australia, they made the election day a holiday. Maybe we could do that. Then on the other hand, I think when Americans see how much it costs for us to have another holiday, they might not like that idea. People could turn it into a long weekend and end up not voting anyway. But we can look at other democracies that seem to be healthier than ours, and we can emulate some of the features of those democracies to make ours more healthy and to improve turnout.
Yeah, I would just say civic education. It's got to start with the young, and it's got to be one of those things where they're just taught that this is something you have to do, and it's just going to have to bubble up from the next generation. Voting should feel like brushing your teeth. It's not something you have to consciously choose and make yourself do. It should be like, oh, time to go vote. And I would say this is particularly important with the primaries. We've got these elections where only 1 in 5 eligible voters showed up. You know, one thing that's been bandied about much is the idea of just taking those elections and moving them to autumn, make them right before the general elections. That way it's like electoral season. It's like NFL season, like you're in the spirit. So you go, you do your primary election, and if there's not a clear winner, why, by gum, show up 2 weeks later and you vote on the top 2 or something like that.
Yeah.
You mentioned the need for civic education, and that received applause. Some of the questions coming in are really talking about how difficult it is not to feel hopeless when you see the low percent of people voting and engaging. Someone notes here that both of you can see that we are in this summer community where people want to be engaged and want to have an impact, both collectively and individually. Can you leave us with a word on moving forward? What are the places we can trust for information, and how do we stay engaged?
Yeah. Well, before I get to the specifics of what you could do to sort of be more optimistic and hopeful about the future, I think it's important to sit back and look at history. I mean, we've had some tumultuous points in American history. Even looking, you know, everybody's been thinking about America 250 and what happened to get the Declaration of Independence and the tremendous sacrifice that our founders took on. I think it's important to remind us of those eras in American politics where we have overcome incredible, violence, tumults, protests. More recently, I would say probably the 60s, the late 60s, early 70s, all of those assassinations. We have overcome those, and so I think there is hope. I do think there are enough people in this country that want a better America, and an America where there's more harmony. I do think in some ways, the more negative features of American politics and the polarization gets more airtime. And so we think it's more polarized than it actually is. It clearly is historic compared to other times in American history. It is higher, but I think that sometimes it can be magnified. And so I think we have to get engaged in our local civic institutions. to the degree that you can encourage other people to volunteer, to participate, to get to know their community. This has to do with members of Congress, but in the 1980s, members of Congress would typically move to Washington and have two households. So they'd have their congressional district in Indiana, their home there, and then they'd have their home in Washington. Their kids would go to schools in the DC area. They would stay in Washington, and they would get to know the other legislators. They would be on the same soccer field watching their children play soccer, and it made it so they weren't vilifying the other side. They actually understood the other side's perspective. And what has happened over time is members of Congress fly into, it's called the Tuesday-Thursday schedule. And they fly into DC Tuesday, the House is operating Tuesday through Thursday, and then they fly back. And no one ever gets to really know the other side. So if there's a neighbor who maybe has a Trump sticker, it's worthwhile to try to talk to people and to be civil, I think.
Very quickly, as Katie alluded to, one way to make yourself feel better is to vary your media diet. And one thing I would say that you should roll into it is stop by the website run by the Library of Congress, congress.gov. There you will see all the laws that are being passed. I think it's a common story that, Congress is broken, they're not doing anything, they're not lawmaking, it's just idiots yelling at each other. No, go to congress.gov. You will see lots and lots of legislation being passed, and it might even be things that you like. I'll leave it on that because I know we're at time.
Kevin, Kosar, Kathryn Tenpas, thank you.
Thank you.